You know what? I'm gonna put on the shirt. It's October. Might as well go for it. All right, there we go. A little bit of Freddy Krueger. My girlfriend hates this shirt, but oh well. Hi everybody, welcome back to Between the Lines. I'm Julian, an obsessive reader and used book collector, and today we're talking the top 10 horror books that I'm just dying to read. These books are the tip top of my Horror TBR and the stuff I'm most excited to get into and hopefully might even get into this October. So this is going to be a mix of novels, short stories, or short story collections. I especially love reading short stories in October. Horror, I think, is my favorite genre when it comes to short stories, and maybe even there'll be one or two in here that are part of a series. So let's get into it. Alright, so starting in at number 10, we have The Beautiful Thing That Awaits Us All by Laird Barron. This is a short story collection specifically of weird fiction. If you don't know what it is, weird fiction is kind of the style or genre of horror that was popularized most famously, I guess, by H.P. Lovecraft, where it's about a lot of weird concepts, strange, surreal things, not necessarily the straightforward horror stuff that people were used to, like ghosts, werewolves, goblins, and all that, but the cosmic, strange, unknowable fears and evils that are out there. I want to read this because I really want to get into modern weird fiction. H.P. Lovecraft is a bit of a controversial figure, but I am really into the genre that he helped popularize. So I really want to get into what weird fiction has evolved into now, and I've read that Laird Barron is actually one of the better writers of weird fiction in today's market. There's also plenty of other weird fiction that I want to get into that were kind of either contemporaries or predecessors of Lovecraft, like Algernon Blackwood, Clark Ashton Smith. And I feel like if I want to get into the genre properly, I'm gonna have to start reading what people are writing in that style today, as opposed to the 1930s and before. And I've heard really good things about this book and this author. I've never read any of his novels or anything like that. When I'm testing out a new author, especially within horror, I like reading their short stories first. I did the same thing with Clive Barker, and I thought that was a good way to get into his style rather than just diving into his bigger works. So I'm gonna do that here with Laird Barron, and if I'm enjoying what he does with these short stories, I think I'm gonna get into his novels as well. At number 9, we have Night Film by Marisha Pessl. This is a book that I think is more of a thriller than it is an outright horror, although it has kind of horror adjacent elements from what I know of it. It's an investigative thriller, and the victim in this story is the daughter of a famous horror movie director, completely fictionalized, not a real director, but it sounded like a really interesting concept to me. If you know me, you know that I love investigative detective kind of stories, and that mixed with horror movies is something that sounds like it's really in my wheelhouse and something that I'm going to enjoy. I love horror movies. I'm obsessed with them. Over the last few Octobers, I do a horror movie challenge where I watch 31 movies for every day in October. I don't know if I'll be able to do that this year just because things are really busy, but I'm absolutely obsessed with horror movies, and to have a book that deals with a horror director and an investigative detective style thriller, I think I'll really enjoy. At number 8, we have Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This is another one that I don't think is outright horror. I'm pretty sure it's more a gothic story, not so much something having to deal with outright scares. I've had this one sitting on my shelf for a couple of years now, and I've been meaning to read it, but just kind of haven't gotten to it yet. I'm curious to know whether or not I should watch the movie first, and I'm talking specifically about the 1930s version, the Oscar-winning one directed by Alfred Hitchcock, and not the new one, which I heard is really bad. But Daphne du Maurier was also the writer of Don't Look Now, and that was adapted into a movie that I really love. So I'm curious to see if I'm gonna enjoy Rebecca as much, and then maybe compare it to the movie, because that movie is just as legendary as the book. At number 7, we have Misery by Stephen King. This is one of my big gaps when it comes to Stephen King. I've read plenty of his books. I've read the entire Dark Tower series, a lot of his classics like The Shining, Carrie, Salem's Lot. This is one of my big gaps, just as The Stand is. I still haven't read The Stand, and having just finished the Dark Tower series this summer, I want to get into more and more King. So Misery was high up on my list, being a big fan of the movie. There's not much to say about this one because everyone kind of knows the plot from how famous the movie is and how great it is. But I just picked up a copy of this at a used bookstore this past weekend, which I'll be showing off in my October used book haul. But I'm debating whether or not to get into this now, if it's a good time. I know that the movie takes place in the winter, and that isolated, cold feeling that was also in The Shining. I kind of want to replicate when I read this one. This is another one where I'm curious to compare the movie and the book. Having come from the movie first, I think I'll be more generous to the changes because I know that the book is the original material. Like a lot of people, I can be kind of judgy when I've read a book first and then watch the movie because I'm always thinking what the difference is and what liberties the filmmakers have taken in adapting the story. I did this a lot with Harry Potter. But coming from the movie first, I don't think I have that mindset just as bad as I do the other way around because I'm just curious to see what the original material was and have more respect for it as its own piece instead of comparing it to just the adaptation. At number 6, we have The Ruins by Scott Smith. This is one that I've heard is actually pretty scary, and I haven't read an actually scary book in a long time, so I'm excited to get into this one. I think the concept is that a group of friends go to Mexico on vacation. Somehow they end up in the wilderness among some ruins, of course, as the title suggests, and a bunch of scary stuff happens. I don't really like going into something that I haven't read yet knowing too much about the plot. That's as far as I know. I know scary stuff is gonna happen. I know characters are going to be put in some crazy situations, but this is one I think I'm going to read in the summer. Considering it takes place in Mexico on vacation, I think that having the environment around me be hot like that will lend more to the book. If you haven't figured it out by this point, I like reading books at certain seasons depending on when the book takes place or what the vibe is. That's why I like reading spooky books in October. I like reading stuff that takes place in the winter. I like reading fantasy in the summer, and I like reading mystery and detective stuff during the cold and dark months as well. This is one that also has a movie adaptation, although I haven't seen it. I heard it's pretty good though, considering it's not a very well-known movie. I've seen it come up in a lot of YouTube videos where people are talking about horror movies, and this one's actually not that bad, but I'm not too interested in watching the movie, so I think in this case I will read the book first, and then maybe down the line I'll watch the movie rather than the other way around. And I picked this one up at a used book sale last year in really good condition, and it's been sitting on my bookshelf now for a year, so it's itching to get read. Next is another one by Stephen King, not the first on my list and maybe not the last. Here we have The Dead Zone. This is one where I've absolutely seen the movie and love the movie. David Cronenberg is actually within my top 5 favorite directors, and he's also Canadian, which is a plus. This is a book I've had sitting on my shelf for a while too, just because I'm so familiar with the film that I just didn't feel like I needed to get back into that story again anytime soon. And this is one when in conversations about Stephen King, you don't hear brought up a lot, even though the movie is so well known. When people talk about King classics from the 70s and 80s, you think about, The Shining, Salem's Lot, Carrie, It. And not a lot of people talk about The Dead Zone, but I've heard the book is actually very good. And this is another case where I'm interested to see where the movie deviates from it without judging the two works too harshly, considering I already love the movie so much. And I said there was another Stephen King book on this list, although it's technically not by Stephen King, it's by Richard Bachman. Next is The Long Walk, which was written under King's pen name, Richard Bachman. This one has a really cool concept. If you don't know what it's about, it involves this sort of dystopian entertainment or game where a bunch of young boys are sent to walk, and if you slow down too much or if you stop walking, you get killed, and it's a source of entertainment for the society, I guess. It's simple, it's effective, it's intriguing, and it's Stephen King, so I'm there for it. And this is the only Bachman book I think I have the desire to read, actually. I really don't care for Thinner. I haven't read the book, but I think the movie was enough to deter me from wanting to read Thinner. And then you got the other stuff like Roadwork and Rage, which I just have completely no interest in reading, so The Long Walk is gonna be it for me with Bachman, I think. And now we enter the top 3 with another one made famous by a legendary movie, The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. I am a big fan of the Exorcist movies. Well, really just movies 1 and 3, because I'm a normal, sane person, and who the hell on this planet likes Exorcist 2? But The Exorcist for me is such a crucial horror movie. I got the 40th anniversary Blu-ray for Christmas last year. I haven't watched it yet in that format, but I'm very excited to do it. A couple months ago, a friend of mine was telling me how The Exorcist was the scariest book he ever read. And for someone who likes horror, I want to be scared again because I'm a little desensitized to it at this point. He also owned Legion, which is the book that was the follow-up to The Exorcist, which was adapted into The Exorcist 3. So I think this is the only kind of series on my list, being Exorcist 1, and then eventually I'll read Legion if I really like the book. Coming in at number 2, we have World War Z by Max Brooks. This is something that I'm absolutely dying to read, but it's been sitting on my shelf for the last year and a half because COVID is happening, and I really don't want to read anything that's about, a worldwide pandemic. It's just too real. I really wanted to read it this October because I thought COVID might have kind of gone by then, but it still hasn't where I live. It's still kind of lingering around, so I think I'll wait maybe until next October to read it. I also found that my local library has a really good audiobook version of this, where every character, I know the book jumps perspectives a lot to different characters around the world, I think. Every character is narrated by a different actor, and the cast list is absolutely stacked. I couldn't believe some of the names on this list. I'll put it up on screen. So now I'm not sure if when the time comes that I'm ready to read this, whether or not I should read the print version that I have, because unfortunately it is a movie tie-in cover. That's what they had at the used bookstore when I found it, or whether I should go for that audiobook version. All right, so before we get to my number one, I just wanted to throw up on the screen some honorable mentions. These are books that I'm really dying to read as well, but they didn't quite make the cut for my top 10. Here, I think you'll find some more short story collections, more Stephen King for sure, and others where I was a big fan of the movies and I want to read the source material. All right, we're here at number one. Number one is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This is a big gap when it comes to my horror reading. I haven't read Frankenstein and I'm a little ashamed to say that I haven't. This is one of those essential classics that every person has to read. Whether or not you're a fan of horror, a lot of people say that you should read Frankenstein, regardless of your interest in the genre. I came to horror a little late. I was actually very scared of anything to do with horror until maybe my early 20s. So at this point, I'm playing a little bit of catch up with reading the quintessential horror books. I actually read Dracula when I was a teenager, which kind of contradicts what I just said about being afraid of horror. Although the book was old enough that it wasn't so scary to me when I read it as like a 14-year-old. But Frankenstein is a huge gap for me, and this is yet again another one where I'm a massive fan of the movie, the original 1931 movie starring Boris Karloff, and I haven't read the source material, and it's actually something I'm gonna read this coming October and we'll be talking about on the channel. I think the Frankenstein movie is my favorite of the classic Universal monster movies. I like the Dracula movie, and I think Creature from the Black Lagoon is fun. The Mummy's a little silly, but Frankenstein for me was always great. I'm also a big fan of Bride of Frankenstein, and I know in this case the movie notoriously took a lot of liberties from the book, so this is another one where I'm curious to explore the differences between the two. So that's it for the top 10 horror books I'm just dying to read. Let me know if you have any of the books I mentioned today on your TBR, or if you've read any of them. Let me know if you liked it or not. Remember to do all the YouTube stuff like liking and subscribing. Thank you for watching. Please remember to support your local library, and I'll see you next time.